There are places on this planet where silence lingers longer than it should. Towns where the air feels heavy, where the ground itself seems to remember the screams. History isn't always about kings and revolutions. Sometimes it's about the things we try to forget, the unspeakable, the horrors that unfold not in battlefields, but in villages, homes, and towns. Tonight, we're peeling back the veil on 5 of the most disturbing massacres in human history. March 16, 1968. In the middle of the Vietnam War, American soldiers from Charlie Company entered a small village called My Lai. Intelligence reports had convinced them that the village was harboring Viet Cong guerrillas, but when they arrived, they found nothing but unarmed civilians. What followed was 4 hours of horror. Over 500 people were murdered, women, elderly men, and children. Infants were thrown into ditches. Women were raped, mutilated, then shot. Some families were herded into their homes, grenades tossed in after them. No Viet Cong were ever found, no weapons. It was a massacre, plain and brutal. And what's worse, it was covered up. For over a year, the military denied it ever happened. It took a whistleblower, a young soldier named Ronald Ridenhour, to expose the truth. Even then, only one officer, Lieutenant William Calley, was convicted. He served just 3 years under house arrest. The My Lai Massacre shattered America's image of moral superiority. It wasn't just a wartime tragedy, it was a mirror held up to the darkest corners of human obedience and silence. A civil war was raging in El Salvador, and the government feared that small rural villages were aiding leftist rebels. On December 11, 1981, a U.S.-trained unit known as the Atlacatl Battalion descended upon the village of El Mozote. They told residents to gather in the central square. They promised they were only conducting a search. Then they separated the men, women, and children. What came next is almost unspeakable. Men were tortured and shot. Women were raped and then executed. Children, some as young as 2 years old, were killed, some hacked to death, others thrown against walls. Over 800 civilians were murdered. The Salvadoran government denied everything. Forensic teams in the 1990s later exhumed mass graves, confirming the scale and cruelty of the atrocity. In some graves, children were found stacked like firewood. The silence around El Mozote lasted for years. And when the truth emerged, it was a chilling reminder of how easy it is to bury not just bodies, but justice. In the midst of the American Civil War, far from the eastern battlefields, a different kind of war was being waged against Native Americans. On November 29, 1864, over 700 members of the Colorado Territory Militia attacked a peaceful encampment of Cheyenne and Arapaho people at Sand Creek. The tribes had been assured protection. They were flying white flags. They were unarmed. It didn't matter. The soldiers opened fire at dawn. Nearly 230 Native Americans were killed, 2/3 of them women and children. Victims were mutilated in grotesque ways. Body parts were taken as trophies. Babies were not spared. The U.S. government initially celebrated the attack, but when eyewitnesses from within the military came forward, public outrage grew. Investigations followed, but no one was truly held accountable. The Sand Creek Massacre was not just an atrocity. It was a betrayal, a deliberate, calculated slaughter carried out under the pretense of protection. Europe, 1995. Decades after World War II, the continent once again saw genocide. The town of Srebrenica in Bosnia had been declared a UN safe zone. Over 25,000 Bosniak Muslims had taken refuge there, believing the blue helmets of the United Nations would protect them. Then came the Serb forces, led by General Ratko Mladic. The UN peacekeepers stood by as the soldiers separated men and boys from the women. The women were bussed out. The men were taken into forests, warehouses, and fields. What followed was systematic slaughter. Over 8,000 were executed. Bulldozers pushed bodies into mass graves. Some victims were buried alive. Others were forced to dig their own graves. The world watched and hesitated. It was the worst massacre on European soil since the Holocaust. Years later, international courts would convict some of the perpetrators. But justice can't bring back the dead. And Srebrenica remains a wound that never fully closed. Jakarta wasn't always a bustling metropolis. In the 18th century, it was Batavia, a colonial hub controlled by the Dutch East India Company. Tensions were rising between the Dutch and the ethnic Chinese community, who were growing in number and influence. Paranoia took hold. Dutch officials feared a rebellion, so they acted first. From October 9 to October 22, 1740, Dutch soldiers and local militias went on a killing spree. Over 10,000 Chinese residents were slaughtered in their homes, on the streets, or dragged into the canals. Some were burned alive. Others were decapitated. The rivers ran red. The massacre lasted for nearly 2 weeks. Entire neighborhoods were emptied. Afterward, the city tried to return to normal, but Batavia was never the same. Ghost stories still persist in the old quarters, whispers of souls who never left. It wasn't a battlefield. It was a purge, done in plain sight. The Batavia Massacre shows how fear, when mixed with power, can justify almost anything. These 5 massacres didn't happen in the heat of battle. They happened in places of supposed peace. They happened because of fear, power, obedience, and hate. And they remain chilling not just for the death toll, but for how easily humanity can turn on itself when morality is cast aside.